Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our portion of the conference. Myself, Rob Philpotts, and Brandon Norberto from BDO Lixar. Just a quick introduction of myself and BDO Lixar. Myself, I'm Rob Philpotts. I'm the Director of Cyber Threat Management here at BDO Lixar. I'm in charge of our Managed Detection and Response Services, Threat Intelligence, Vulnerability Management. We run a highly automated operation within our practice, and we're here today to share some of these sort of stories from the field with you today. And Brandon, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Norberto. I come to this field with approximately 9 years experience in automation, most of which in the security field. And yeah, as Rob said, we're going to bring you some success stories from the field. I'll be kicking things off, if anything, with some, I guess, life lessons as we worked through them over the years. So I'm going to kick things off then on my side, and we'll bring ourselves a quick introduction as to why we automate. What is the promise of automation? And the promise at a very high level is in the form of a SOC, we want to reduce the time that it takes to detect, investigate, and respond to security incidents. We want to, from the analyst's perspective, the analyst would like to remove the monotony of repetitive tasks and enable themselves to spend more time on those high-value data-driven decisions. And from an informational perspective, the promise of automation gives a very efficient scaling of information gathering and data enrichment for those higher fidelity investigations, essentially allowing us to greatly expand the amount of data that we're able to consume and to crunch with each and every alert without needing to expand to massive numbers. So today, we're going to look into a little bit of a lessons learned from the field, and we'll be taking you through a story of the automation lifecycle as we do that. So to start, we're going to have our very simplistic, very high level, and this is for the sake of focus on our lessons as we go through our cycle. But our simplistic process is just a simple triage, investigation, response, and report, something that any sort of SOC will end up going through when it comes to an alert that needs to be investigated and remediated. So with our typical security process here, we're going to be taking this from the perspective of a new security automation engineer. From this perspective, you've come in to this here SOC and you've been tasked with the duty of taking our process here and automating it. Where do you start? How do we end up taking this from what was something that was performed manually since the beginning? And how can we effectively take this into a fully automated, fully developed process, immersed in automation technology across from beginning to end, effectively from planning to implementation and thereafter into ongoing support and continued development. And here we'll begin with our first lesson. And the first real lesson is no automation can happen without a rigorously defined process and agreed upon metrics on how you're going to measure yourself. So in our simple process here, this comes down to, in each stage of our investigation, what are we doing, right? And from this perspective, I am being extremely specific because this is where automation is made or broken. At the end of the day, when we're talking with security automation, we do not have the luxury of a human brain to interpret, have intuition, and to take a goal and find their way to it. So with that, each and every step from when an alert fires onto a SIEM to which fields I look at in order to decide and prioritize effectively must be defined in order for us to have a chance of building effective automation to get us going here. Now, I'm emphasizing this point very intently, and that is for the purpose of that understanding of if you automate a broken process, you're going to automate you're going to have broken automation. It is as simple as that. And if there is one lesson for someone to take away from this today, it is this: understand your process. That doesn't mean, though, each and every one of our lessons after this are not as important. Our next step here as well is understand your metrics. What are we measuring ourselves against before we begin? It is very important to have a baseline, because it's very important to actually not only understand for yourself, but for your analysts and for your stakeholders. What was your before picture, right? And what is your baseline that you're going to be measuring yourself going forward in order to measure your success, right? Understanding this from this point on will be key at every stage going forward in order for you to measure yourself on how your automation is performing, but additionally as well to help understand and continue to build and evolve your roadmap and reprioritize as items come up. But okay, so we have our process, we have our metrics, and our next step that we really need to get into here in order to perform implementation is each and every one of these steps now need to have an automation task defined, right? Once again, what are we doing ends up being the question, right? Because at the end of the day, you as the engineer are now building each and every one of these tasks, right? Whether it be a low effort item such as alert ingestion, be it by an email, by API, we don't need to choose at this point in time, or well, hey, I don't judge. Whether it be a more a higher effort type item such as building a decision tree, right? It's important to assign at least approximate effort at this point as to how difficult each item may be. And we'll get to why that's important in a moment. And then lastly as well, though, understand the capabilities of automation at each stage of your process here. Automation could be performed in multiple different layers across multiple different platforms. And each of them are capable of performing the tasks that they do within their area fairly effectively. And at this stage, as you're about to implement, it's important to understand, what platform do you have available for one, and then which platforms what are the strengths of each platform? What are the limitations of each platform? And make sure that you plan effectively as to which task will go where, how difficult is each and every task, because this is going to be a roadmap for implementation going forward. With this, now we start planning, and then we start building, and this is where the fun starts. We begin with our big roadmap now organized by effort and impact that they can have, and we have to start planning them into different phases. And where do we begin ends up being the question. And my answer to you is don't be afraid to start small. Don't be afraid to start incrementally making improvements. A lot of my experience in the past, especially working with a variety of very well-talented security analysts, a lot of that experience has opened my eyes to understand that it's not always as simple to just tackle the biggest, highest value, highest time saving task first. If that task takes you like a month to complete, 2 months to complete. Some of the biggest stories that stick with me are things as simple as, an analyst coming to me at some point being like, hey, Brandon, this, big decision tree you're working on, I think is going to be really cool, but if you can help me out today and reduce the number of buttons I click from 3 buttons to 1 or to 0, well, that would be huge. At the end of the day, analysts can work on something upwards of 15 to 20 events. Take that across a 5-day work week, and all of a sudden you have upwards of 100 alerts, 3 buttons being clicked, 300 buttons being clicked. Sometimes the small low-hanging fruit that you can actually implement almost immediately can end up having a very large impact to the quality of life of your analysts. And at the end of the day, as an automation engineer, these are our end users that we're here to serve. And so I say, don't be afraid to hit that low-hanging fruit. Don't be afraid to make someone's day a little bit easier one day at a time. Now, I'm not saying don't touch that big decision tree, not at all. But I think it is valuable. It is incredibly valuable to be able to put out consistent improvement, even as you're working towards your larger goals. And that'll end up being something that's good for your stakeholders, for your analysts, for your metrics, and for you. Give yourself a little pat on the back after you get even the tiniest task done, because this is what you're here for. Lastly, we're at the stage of sustainment. We have our big checklist done. And now the question is, how do we continue good practice, good automation practice going forward? And really, my hope is what I've given you today is a list of foundations that can be used going forward. And my answer to how you sustain automation is by using those foundations continuously as we continue down our journey of automating anything we can get our hands on in the SOC. Now, what I can tell you for certain is the task of automation will never be complete, because we live in a very exciting industry that is cybersecurity. And this is constantly changing with new technologies and new practices. So what I will promise you is your plate will be full with all sorts of tasks that can be done, that can be automated. So as you evolve your roadmap, as you continue automating, remember to follow these foundations. Know your process, know your metrics. Don't be afraid to touch the low-hanging fruit. Don't be afraid to get, something easy done in between of something hard, just to get those little goals out. And continuously take feedback from your users, your stakeholders, your metrics. And what I promise you is that even if you follow a few of these, you will have a very fruitful, very enjoyable journey in security automation. I hope these have been helpful. I hope you take these going forward in your own journey, whether you're an engineer or whether you're even a security analyst looking to support an automation engineer or become one yourself. There's a lot of parts to play in this big field here. Now I'm going to pass things over to Rob And Rob is going to be talking a little more in depth about some additional applications of automation, specifically within the log ingestion layer.
Before you switch, Brandon, I really love this topic, and I love the approach that you take with your automation framework. Okay, because from the top down, right, there's folks who's like, automation is going to solve everything. It does not replace human intuition. From the bottom up, you want to achieve buy-in to your automation, right? Like, people may be skeptical of it. So if you take too long to automate, or if you have no proof of life through your metrics, etc., you're not going to get that buy-in. So this approach works really well. And I just like to touch on our very contemporary operation we describe it sort of as a master process flow within which we have hundreds of dozens and dozens, I'll say, of workflows. Okay, we know that each of those processes can be executed by a human. All right, and we, over time, we sort of a DevOps approach, if you will. Over time, we automate these widgets based on the feedback, based off changes in the technology, and it works really well. So thank you for that, Brandon.
Thank you as well. And over to you. I'm going to switch the slide over here. Take it away.
Awesome. So another area where automation is really helping out is in the area of cyber fusion. So the era of fusion sort of came out last decade, and it's sort of an idea that comes from the intelligence community where I used to serve. And it's this idea that you collect everything because you never know when you're going to need that one little piece of information to complete a whole picture. So this is indeed a very important goal to have. But unfortunately, the technology available at the time that this era of fusion sort of came into the private sector, the technology just wasn't up for it. We were still sending all our logs to the center to be correlated. Okay. And I can tell you, like many security people, a lot of those use cases lead to closeouts with no action, right? So what you see here on your screen is your typical setup where you have a variety of log sources on the left flowing into a data lake like Splunk or Sumo Logic, etc. All right. And all of that data is sort of kept there, very expensive for that potential moment of correlation. So guess what? This is causing burden across a number of organizations that are well-resourced to sort of, absorb that. But they're finding that that's an issue, and they're trying to get away from that burden of the cost of sending all this stuff to the data lake no matter what. So the key is that thanks to changes in technology and some changes into pre-existing technology and some new technologies, we now have an opportunity to use automation to move our data around much more smartly than just by throwing it in a data lake. So let's go to the next slide, please, Brandon. So 3 big sort of ideas here, okay? Starting on the left side, all right, you have the advent of what some will call them smart security technologies, some will call them integrated security technologies. A very common type of technology is an EDR, right? So this is essentially the ability to do that correlation at the edge as opposed to at the center. And if you if you use a good EDR product and you tune it properly, you're going to get very high quality actionable alerts most of the time. Similar integrated technologies are found within the cloud platforms itself, like AWS. Their basic security realized through Security Hub and GuardDuty, high quality alerts that that only that integration within that platform can detect, or best, right? In Azure, you have the alerts and incidents derived through the Defender products. So these smart products are suddenly giving us very high quality alerts. So what does that mean? It means maybe just maybe, I don't have to send everything to the middle. I don't have to do that right now. And here's the second enabler why this is possible. So there are technologies at the pre-ingestion layer that do a variety of things in terms of log management. So technologies like one called Cribl, CRIBL, for example. And these technologies, they manage logs in a number of ways, but one key feature is the ability to move logs into the investigator's view if the moment calls for it. So if a high quality alert that's high confidence, well-tuned, very reliable, comes out of my EDR, my cloud, any integrated technology, and it goes through Cribble. Cribble will identify, okay, there's a high confidence alert. If your process calls for, let's say, just keep it simple here, bring in the last 60 days of, log A, log D, log F, right, to accompany this investigation that a human needs to carry out, Cribble will allocate those logs that are actually going into warm storage, not the center. It'll see that alert and it'll bring those logs into the data lake for potential correlation. Just before that happens, however, a key thing here I missed, my apologies, is that what we're sending to the center as a result of these technologies is, and the center being your correlation engine, is the alerts and less so these sort of less important logs. Those less important logs are flowing to warm storage, where an investigator may want them, right, to do that sort of last mile of investigation. And that's where Cribble is valuable. There's logs going into warm storage. You see that high quality alert pass over, and then Cribble will reach into those data sets and allocate those logs to your center to carry on with correlation and investigation. The result of this is you're going to lower your storage burden. You're very likely going to maintain full security relevance, and you have a much smoother and simpler sort of security aperture to manage at that point. And a lot of major institutions, financial, others in the world, are approaching log ingestion in this manner to reduce that burden, because our digital footprint's only increasing. There's only going to be more logs. So you can't look at everything all the time. So this is so this concludes my portion of the conversation. I think now we'd like to perhaps look at some questions. There's one thing I wanted to throw in, however. One thing I wanted to throw in here. Just back on Brandon's part, a very valuable use case for automation in the SOC is applying automation to traditional antivirus hits. Signature-based defense, where there's 100% confidence that you have a hit, that is ideal for automation. And guess what? If you do that successfully, that can extend an investment. I know most big organizations are moving off sort of basic AV, but if you have that, it can extend that investment and make it valuable, because those signatures, signature defense has its limits, but it's still relevant to a degree. So I just wanted to give that example quick because it was here in my notes. All right, so I think now we'll look to questions.
Absolutely. And Rob, before you do as well, I'll just mention for your part really quick, I'd love that this ends up being just an additional example for how our field continues to evolve, and then we continue to see more and more areas where automation can be applied in effective ways and in more ways that are than just save time, right? This is just another fantastic example. And hey, this is another one of the reasons why, as an automation engineer, your job will never be done. So thank you for the example for this session as well. Now we can jump into questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so I see a few questions here. Brandon, that first one about AI replacing security analysts, I'll just throw in here. Vendors talk like, yes, AI, okay, sure, it is coming, certainly, right? But our human brains are still highly intuitive and can connect the dots really fast. So we're not portraying here that automation solves your problems or AI solves your problems. It's a key component. Humans are still absolutely central to this. What do you have to say, Brandon?
This question is a great one for that example of constantly changing technology and constantly changing practice, because you're right. As of today, AI cannot completely replace a security analyst. I'll make that claim right now. But what it can do at the very least is we are seeing it used more and more in various security tools, such as your EDR or your SIEM technologies. And that is being used to give out higher fidelity alerts, and is something that I don't think is it cannot be ignored as well when it comes to how you take that information and use it within your practices. So will AI in the future ever replace a security analyst? I don't know, but that's kind of the fun of it, really, isn't it? Right? You get to see how the ship goes as you end up, being a part of it as well.
So I see a second question here. So the first one's about AI. There's another question here about what are essential skills needed in the SOC. These actually bridge together really nice. Okay, because while AI may not be solving all our problems at the moment, okay, what certainly is the reduction of IT logistics as a result of cloud platforms, right? So by taking away the sort of the IT, I mean, there's still IT department, but opening a ticket, putting in a machine, getting the machine, all of that on-prem stuff, right? We can now bring engineers like Brandon much closer to the action instantaneously, thanks to these cloud platforms. So in terms of skills needed in the SOC, I think the degree of skill, in fact, is going to go up. And what we're seeing in industry is that this emergence, there's various terms, but this emergence of the term cloud security engineer. And this is someone who does operations all the way through to the design. And what happens is, where you used to have sort of a team of, hundreds of project people and security people working to deploy an application, for example, that cloud security engineer can carry out a lot of those tasks on the security side, including the monitoring, if that's what falls into your description, but they can do all those tasks sort of together. And the ability to respond, the lack of the logistics, means that the skill of the investigator needs to actually go higher. This idea of L1s is going to go away with automation and AI, certainly very soon. But the senior investigator, the person that can manipulate the cloud environment in response, those skills need to come up. And so I guess to answer that second question, what are the skills? You need to learn your cloud environment. You need to learn about cloud security, the specific, pieces of cloud security. One more component, like in cloud, identity and access management skills are probably number one. Understanding those concepts around access to your cloud platform, probably the number one priority I would recommend. So just a brief answer there, but that's a great conversation. Brandon, what do you think?
So I can add on to this, actually, from, if anything, a bit of an automation perspective. But one thing I can say for certain in my past experiences, and what continues in my current experiences, is being able to work extremely closely with a security analyst. So as a security analyst, one of the things I would say is an important skill to have is to understand the benefits, and don't be afraid to be a part of that, of the development and automation, right? You don't need to be a software engineer to be able to take part in the automation of the processes that are going on around you, right? Some of my biggest successes have indeed come from partnering with some very senior, very talented analysts. And the reason why past automation platforms I've deployed and built, the reason they were a success were because of being able to be that close with senior analysts that had an understanding of this is how this can be used to enable not only my work but those of my team as well, right? Mm-hmm. So as a security analyst, embrace the technology that's growing around you, right? Don't be afraid to be a part of it, and be curious, right? Get into it.
Awesome. So thanks for the opportunity. This is virtual, so I just want to avoid sort of the curtains down kind of thing here in the virtual. But thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you all. We really appreciate it. We'll be in our booth today. Please feel free to drop by, have a conversation with us about any subject around cybersecurity or automation. And thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the conference.